Good day. My name is Edward Roberts. I am the Smokealizer product manager for a company called Bedfont Scientific Limited. Yeah, and we manufacture a range of breath analyzers which assist in smoker cessation. Today, we're joined by some fellow associates and close friends of ours to discuss World Tobacco Day on the 31st of May, coming at the end of this week. And the theme is for protecting children from tobacco industry interference. I'd like to start by introducing you to Professor Amer Nordin, who's a member of our medical advisory board for the Smokealizer range at Bedfont. He's an associate professor in psychiatry and a consultant psychiatrist within the University of Malaysia. He's an adjunct professor in public health in the Universitas Erlangga in Indonesia. And I think I'll let you discuss the rest and introduce your friends there if it's okay, Amir.
Thank you very much there, Edward, and also welcome everyone to the first inaugural event that we're having together with Bedfont Limited, all the way from the UK. So I've have the pleasure today to actually start this discussion that we were having to celebrate World No Tobacco Day 2024. So if you're not familiar with World No Tobacco Day, it's actually a day whereby the WHO has put across globally so that people like yourselves and ourselves over here can celebrate and hope and aspire to have a day that tobacco is no more. And the main idea for this World No Tobacco Day is actually to improve awareness and, of course, to link up with a number of initiators and advocates in promoting a world without tobacco. So without further delay, I wanted to introduce our two panel that I've got here today with us to celebrate with us this World No Tobacco Day 2024. So we're mainly from the south part of the world. So I've got at the very start here, Professor Christopher Bullen, who's a professor in public health, linked with the University of Auckland. He's also the past president of the Society Research Nicotine and Tobacco, and a very, a very good colleague of mine, a friend of mine, who's been working a lot in innovations for smoking cessation down in Australia and also globally. Chris, would you like to say hello to the team over here?
Yes, indeed. Welcome, everybody. And it's great to be part of the panel, and I look forward to our discussion. So thanks, Amer, for the introduction. New Zealand is my home, not Australia, but small point.
No problem. So I've also got together with me today from Malaysia, adjunct professor Dr. Ann Yee, who is with the University of Malaya and also an assistant professor in the School of Medicine, Monash, Malaysia. She's a consultant psychiatrist and also an expert in addiction, particularly smoking cessation. And she's done a lot of innovative work as well in our region, particularly Malaysia, looking at ways to assist people to quit smoking. So Anne, how are you?
Good. Right. Thanks, Amil, for the introductions, and I'm looking forward to the discussions of today.
So I think for our audience, as Edward had mentioned just now, the theme for 2024 World No Tobacco Day is actually protecting children against the tobacco industry influence. So there's a lot of discussion at this point of time with regards to the role that the industry and also how smoking is affecting our young people globally. And as a result of that, this year's theme is actually focusing on children and smoking particularly. I think before we actually really dive deep into some of the issues, maybe we just get a little bit of an idea about what the situation is like in our panel's countries, so that we just have a bit of an idea about the situation. Chris, how's the situation in terms of smoking and young people in New Zealand?
Well, it's probably as good as it's ever been, Amer. We've managed to see the smoking among young people drop down below 5% for all population groups. So even in the groups where smoking used to be really high, it's really plummeted. And that's come about through a huge amount of effort and research and advocacy and then good policy making. And so young people aren't smoking anymore. The challenge is many of the young people who've never smoked are now taking up vaping. And so vaping in young people who've never smoked has become the sort of issue of the day. But having said that, things change very quickly in this space. And so I don't think we can rest on our hands and think that smoking's gone away. It's not a problem anymore in this part of the world. And I speak for New Zealand, but it perhaps reflects the situation in other countries similar to New Zealand, like Australia, Canada, etc., where things can change very quickly and we could just see an uptick in smoking again. So I don't think we can think we've got rid of the problem. We're kind of on top of it at the moment, but we need to monitor it really closely and not underestimate the role of the tobacco industry in trying to turn things backward again.
And what about the situation here, and any thoughts about the situation here and also maybe the region as well, Southeast Asia?
All right, in Malaysia, smoking still remains a significant public health issue. Although it's like according to the National Health and Mobility Survey that we have done like last year 2022, there is a decline in the rates of current cigarette use among adolescents aged 13 to 17, dropped from 13.8% in 2017 to 6.2% in 2022. The use of the e-cigarettes and vape, right, among teenagers has increased tremendously. The prevalence of e-cigarettes or vape use in this age group actually rose from 9.8% in 2017 to 14.9% in 2022. So we also in the studies also found that there is a notable gender disparity in tobacco's products usage. So with 23.3% of the adolescents males currently engage in vaping, and while only 6.2 of them is engaged in smoking. So in the females parts, 6.2% of the adolescents females is vaping now, compared to 1.7% that's smokes cigarettes. So this data indicates that about twice as many teenager males vape compared to smoking cigarettes, while vaping is nearly 4 times more common than smoking cigarettes among teenager girls. So there is a shift in the tobacco consumptions trends in Malaysia now. So adolescents now appear to be substituting traditional cigarettes with e-cigarettes and vapes. So this shift generally represent a new challenge for public health efforts aimed at reducing overall tobacco use among youth.
I mean, I find this really fascinating because on the one hand, as Chris had mentioned, in some countries, we're seeing a decline of young people smoking. But on the other hand, we're seeing a large number of children still smoking in certain parts of the world. So as you both rightly mentioned, that smoking is still a major issue globally. But I think both of you are sharing as well that as we are dealing with smoking globally, we're also seeing a large number of young people starting to vape, and look, at least looking at the data here in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, this number seems to be fairly significant. But again, you mentioned that, Chris, that number has also increased a little bit in terms of the countries like New Zealand as well. Just Chris, just going back again to the theme and also some of the data that Anne shared and the one that you mentioned just now, does this, are we concerned? I mean, is there a reason why do you think WHO has brought this up as a theme that, we should be concerned about?
Yeah, well, I think it's appropriate for a focus on young people because of, I mean, the big issue at the moment is on vaping, but it's just one of a number of products that are coming into flooding the marketplace that are being marketed at a younger audience. So as smoking drops in many, many countries, the tobacco industry obviously wants to continue to sell its products. And so it's moved to low and middle income countries, trying to recruit more women for example, in countries where smoking prevalence among women has historically been very low. So there's an opportunity to get smoking in women to be more like smoking levels in men. So that's an opportunity, but also to try and hook young people into smoking. And then if they can't get them to smoking, to try other products that they manufacture and market aggressively, and particularly in countries where the regulatory environment is weak. And actually, I would have to say that in South Asia, where you are, there's very strong regulation in some countries like Singapore, but then there's almost no regulation in some other countries like Indonesia, which is just starting to get into gear. But New Zealand and Australia would have been regarded as some of the world leaders in tobacco control. But and whilst our smoking rates have dropped considerably, our vaping rates are now, you know, about they're much higher than in Malaysia, for example,
Right.
because we've got a kind of permissive approach to vaping in adults. It's banned in under 18-year-olds, right? But despite the ban, young people are still vaping. But they've been seen here, as in the UK, as a tool to help smokers quit. And I think for a while that's what they were used for, until the advent of modern disposable vapes, cool-looking vapes with all sorts of flavors, and they were marketed online via social media to young people. And that's where we saw a big flick up here and in other countries in vaping. So I think it's a relatively recent phenomenon, but it just highlights the fact that we have to be really vigilant and see what's going on, and have systems in place to track sudden changes in these products as they come into the market, and to understand them better. And we're not very good at that, and governments are too slow to put regulations in place in a fast-moving marketplace. So we need to learn the lessons, and I think our governments and our research community, our advocacy communities need to get better at getting the insights early and red flagging when problems are heading towards us.
And well, that's a really good point there. And I just wanted to ask, Anne, what about yourself? Do you find that the theme, seems to resonate with you? I mean, you brought up the data. They seem to be very concerning. And I think Chris had mentioned some of the potential problems. Your thoughts moving forward in this issue?
Well, it's right. Like I say, that's right. The Malaysia's challenge is always right. There is a continuous tobacco companies interference. They're targeting the youth and encourage smoking in my countries. And these tactics are designed to making smokings and vapings more attractive and accessible to the young people. So like what Chris says is like Malaysia government's well, not only happen in my country, I'm sure other country also have the same problems. It's like they respond much slower than the marketing. So currently, right, in terms of these regulations, actually Malaysia's it's not doing too bad. We do have sometimes some certain laws to actually curb the tobacco use, such as we had this Control of Tobacco Products Regulations 2004 under the Food Act 1983, which includes measures like advertising bans, graphic health warnings, and restrictions on sales to the minors that below the 18s. And this year, we have another law that's get gazetted, which is the Control of Smoking Products for Public Health Act 2024, Act 852. However, this act is not operationalized yet. So it's already gazetted, but it's not actually on force yet. So while we are waiting for it to be operationalized, the nicotine vape products actually can remain legal for sales to minors aged below 18 years for now. So because last year our Ministry of Health decided to remove the liquid and gel nicotine from the poison list of controlled substance under the Poison Act 1952.
Right.
Hints, yeah, so it's right. Now it's like we are falling behind to regulate these vapings and all these innovative products, tobacco products in Malaysia. And as you can see, that's the tobacco companies see that as an opportunity, so they use a lot of tactics, to try to attract as many users as they can. Yeah.
Well, Chris, it seems that Anne has really brought up a number of challenges that at least we're facing in Malaysia, particularly. Are you aware of any other challenges that colleagues globally are being challenged or faced with, particularly in protecting young people and children against smoking and the industry's tactics, for example?
Well, yes, I am. And in fact, one of them is very close to home, which is in New Zealand. We actually had an act in law that after, in a number of years' time, anybody born after January the 1st, 2009 would not be able to be sold tobacco. It would be illegal to sell. That's called the smoke-free generation. And in fact, the current UK government signaled that that was intent on bringing that similar law into place. Embarrassingly for New Zealand, no sooner had we enacted that as part of a really radical series of smoke-free laws, but this was the one trying to protect future generations of children from taking up smoking, then a new government was elected, and that government repealed the legislation in March this year. And so one of the primary pieces of legislation that would have secured the right of our children and future generations to not be sold this defective product, tobacco, was taken away. And so the same thing is at risk in the UK. I'm not sure what if there's an election. Well, there will be an election soon, and it's possible that a new government might dilly-dally over the smoke-free generation policy. But I mean, we're fortunate to have had a government that actually put that into legislation. It's embarrassing the new government took it away, but at least there was certainly public support and at the time political support for it. So it does send out a message that some of these things are actually possible. But I think the repeal of that law was directly due to tobacco industry interference with our political decision makers. In fact, there's good evidence that directly or indirectly, the tobacco industry has been working away to undermine New Zealand's policies, which would have protected our children and created a smoke-free future for them. So we should not, even in a kind of stable, reasonably transparent democracy like New Zealand, which rates high on not having much corruption in government, etc. Even so, in a country like ours, the tobacco industry has got long tentacles and has a lot of influence, has deep pockets, and can influence, whether it's directly influencing politicians or the people who whisper in the ears of the politicians. They will do what they can to exert their influence, and I think that's what we've seen. So, that's kind of at one end. And then at the other end, globally, I mean, there are still many, many countries which have got practically no protection for, against the sale of single cigarettes to young people or underage sales. So, and there are countries whose whole income is dependent on growing tobacco, and children are working in the fields harvesting tobacco and getting nicotine sickness from contact with tobacco leaves. So you've got horrific, massive problems in some countries where there's a lot of work to be done. But even in a country with advanced tobacco control policies, it's not even a guarantee that things will be in place to protect our young people.
Would you like to chime in a little bit there, Anne, in terms of the efforts in your country, our country actually, in terms of the smoke-free generation that Chris was mentioning?
Yeah, Malaysia actually has done like recognize the critical needs to address the youth smoking, and actually they have tried their best to have a lot of initiatives, right, to try to assist children's not to start smoking or right assist children who are already smoking. So one of it's like we have this national quit smoking campaigns. It's called Tak Nak Merokok campaigns. So this is like a non-smoking like campaigns. Is still ongoing. So it aims to discourage smoking among youth through various medias, including TV, radios, and online platforms. They do also have like a school-based programs that implemented by the Ministry of Education in collaborations with the Ministry of Health. And right, this program integrates anti-smoking educations into the school curriculum. It includes workshops, seminars, and interactive sessions to educate students about the dangers of smoking and offer support for those who wish to quit. There are also like peer support groups where students can support each others in their efforts to quit smoking. We also have quit smoking clinics across the country, so including in the rural areas. So these clinics provide professional counseling, nicotine replacement therapy, and other resources to help individuals quit smoking. And we have a digital initiative that offers online so-called like support for the smokers who wish to quit, and it's called M-Quit program. Jom Quit. So this program includes like an online platform that provides like tips, like motivational messages, and to help users manage their quitting process. Of course, right, so we also have like a community-based program that's run by the few local health departments and profits uh, organizations, and that engage families and communities in the anti-smoking efforts. Um, and of course, we also have these like tobacco control regulations, as just now I already say, and smoke-free like zones, expanding the numbers of the smoke-free zones, so particularly around the schools and the eatery place. And now we are just waiting for these control of the smoking products for Public Health Act 2024 to come to an act. So it's like then we could actually have like more regulations on that. We also try to produce many smoking cessation service providers. So currently we have like two certificates, like a program to certify healthcare providers to provide smoking cessation services. That is one of them is by Prof. Amer, like it's called like a scope smoking cessation organizing, plannings and executions. And the other one is by our another colleagues in the Terengganu, like certified smoking cessation service provider, CSCSP. So I think there's a lot of efforts that we're trying to do here. Like for myself, we also start out a smoking cessation apps. So we start this Gempak apps, which is especially designed for these Malaysian context. Is a smoking cessation apps and to tailor the most suitable smoking cessation method based on smokers' personality and preference. We actually also planned as and I think it's also I hope that it can actually happens in the future is to adding the smokerizers Bedfont smokerizers features to these Gempak apps so that we can track users carbon monoxide levels and providing real-time feedbacks on the reductions of harmful substances in their body, and also use it as motivational tools and educational resource to highlight the benefits of quitting smoking. Also offer as part of the personalized support plans, helping users and counselors monitor the progress and adjust the strategies accordingly.
Well, it looks like there's a lot of activities that we're actually doing here in Malaysia. In terms
we are
of
not doing that bad.
at least in terms of assisting children and also adults, of course, in the smoking issue. But I wanted to pick out two particular interesting observation that you mentioned, and I think particularly maybe for Chris. One was in Malaysia, they've tried to do some legislations in terms of where you can actually sell tobacco products, uh, particularly in schools, or at least areas where schools are available, young people. Number one, the question would be, is that, are you aware of, things are happening basically in New Zealand? And number two, would that be something that we could do as a whole, all of us together, in actually reducing smoking prevalence among young people? I think that's the first one. And I think the second one that I just wanted to pick up again from what Anne was sharing, and just wanted your thoughts and views about this, is the use of these new technology. On one hand, I'm very much aware that the new social media has introduced a number of problems in many countries, including ours, in selling not only tobacco products but also vaping products. And what are your thoughts about that, and what do you think we could actually do about it? I mean, these two issues mainly.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first issue is really around the sort of visibility and proximity of tobacco products, retail outlets to schools and other places that children gather. Certainly there's good research evidence that the closer, more dense the retail environment and the signage and so forth, then children are more likely to associate signs, brands, etc., with tobacco products, and that probably there's some suggestion that might drop their guard, if you like, and make it a little bit easier for them to access these products. The same with vaping stores. We found that there's a proliferation of vaping retailers in proximity, particularly in poorer areas, and so we now have some regulation around the proximity of specialist vaping retailers. In other words, retailers that predominantly sell vaping products. They have to be more than 300 meters from an early childhood centre, a school, or a marae, which is an indigenous Maori sort of meeting ground. But we don't have the same rules for general vaping retailers, i.e. petrol stations, delicatessens, corner grocery stores that also sell a small range of vapes. And in fact, those are the stores that young people are probably more likely to access their vapes from, and tobacco. So I think there are things that can be done in terms of regulating the environment, which is produces cues and sort of normalizes the product use in the environment. So regulation of those retailers, and that could be they may perhaps be able to sell the products but not advertise them in the windows, no colors or brands that are associated with them. Obviously we need enforcement where we have regulations like this, because without it, and without some heavy penalties, retailers will they'll weigh up the risks versus the benefits, and if they think it's unlikely they're going to be caught out, they'll probably try and sell to young people under age. Right. So I think, though, you have to have a balanced view. So if we're going to do this for vaping, we should also be doing it for tobacco products, in my view. In other words, smoked tobacco products, not just vapes, but looking at a level of risk for young people. Smoking is arguably much more harmful than vaping. Both can induce, nicotine dependence. And so I think we need to be sort of even-handed or proportionate in the way we treat those kind of rules and regulations. So I think there's a good body of evidence that governments should act, or local government or national government should take actions to create a supportive environment for young people that does not make it too easy for them to use these products, number one. Number two, your question about digital tools. As you say, there are kind of plenty of digital lures out there. they're kind of like missiles being fired. And I think the countermeasures that you have to do to block those advertising and marketing messages that are about to blow young people away, have to be very sophisticated to counteract the very sophisticated marketing. And it's really hard because we just don't have the same resourcing in our public health sector. So we have to be smart and with less resources. And we have to be one step ahead of the game, because as soon as kind of one area shut down, these guys will figure out another way to get through to young people. And it might be through subtle, really subtle sort of branding, or through influencers, cool people that young people follow, musicians, other people on social media that they think are cool, who then start using these products on their TikTok thing. So, it's very hard to counter that sort of thing. It's I don't know what the answers are, except that we need to get marketers involved in helping us to design the countermeasures, and not think that public health people are smart enough to do it. It really does require specific expertise to counter some of those measures. But Anne, I think you probably want to add something. Did I see your hand going up? No. Anyway, so I think, digital tools such as Anne mentioned, apps and messaging, all these things, there's some evidence, particularly around messaging, that can be an effective tool for helping to support young people. But, there's a lot more research that needs to be done to figure out what works for a particular group of people in a particular locality where the policy settings may differ. We can't just take evidence from New Zealand or Australia or US and put it in the middle of Malaysia and think that it's going to be effective. It won't. It's because it's such a different context. And so that's why it's important that people like yourselves are doing this kind of work locally.
Well, I was really, and I hear you loud and clear there, Chris, in terms of some of the challenges. But I think one of them that you brought up a couple of times in both of our discussion, the questions, was about branding. Now, I'm aware that in New Zealand, and correct me if I'm wrong, we've got point of sale ban and plain packaging already in place.
Yeah, complete plain packaging. No, it's only graphic warning labels and no logos or anything. Yeah.
So for some of our friends here, Chris had mentioned us very briefly, if you're having plain packaging, these are going to be tobacco products that don't have any level of branding. They probably just have a name in the same font and healthcare, health warning messaging, but you won't be able to identify brand ABC because if you're not familiar with them to begin with. But I think it's very different from the situation that we have, at least in Malaysia and most of Southeast Asia. Are you seeing that that's a major problem, and in terms of what Chris had mentioned, where branding seems to be, one way that young people are lured, if that's the word to use, into using these tobacco products?
Well, definitely, it's like certain brands is perceived as less harmful than others. Although, right, the truth is like they're equally harmful. Well, it's like and some people, right, they believe that like they smoke certain brand, they are like safer than others. So yes, blending is one of the problems, and Malaysia also tries to like go for the blank packaging. It's like, but it is not successful, not there yet. Another thing is like I think in Malaysia, like the accessibility is an issue, right? So right, we have these retailers, right, selling of the cigarettes and tobacco related products at the eateries place and like other public places. So it contributes to the normalizations of the tobacco use. So right, although right there is age restrictions, but like the teenagers basically have seen, right, how the cigarettes was being purchased, right, after they have a nice dinner at the eatery place. It's so easily accessible. And now I found that like they started to put the vape products beside these the cashier. So
Right.
together with the sweets and snacks and all that kind of things, and with their eye levels. So very soon they will wanted to try because of this we so-called indirect marketing. I think this widespread availability and visibility can influence adolescents and making the smoking and vaping seems like acceptable and common behaviors. And such environments actually increase the likelihood of underage access to these products. So I think that is the main ones. One thing to when Chris talked about different country got their context of it. So in Malaysia, when I translate the Wenger-Strom's nicotine dependence skills, there's one particular skills for saying that which cigarettes that you hate to give up most. So the if you hate to give up the morning one, you will get 1 point, and other time you'll get 0 point. But in Malaysia, I had to add on another points for that. It's I will put in after meal. Because apparently in Malaysia, it's the cigarette they hate to give up is after meal. So you can see how powerful the psychological conditioning of indirectly marketing of the cigarettes and these after meal. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I wish that
fascinating.
we have these restrictive measures or regulations to ban the tobacco products to be sold in the eateries place.
Sounds so
Very good.
depressing just listening
Yeah.
to some of the conversation that we're having. It's supposed to be a celebration of World No Tobacco Day, but at the same time, I'm feeling rather, almost despondent listening to the challenges, not only in my country when it's said to me, but also in our region, and also listening to things happening down south. And as you rightly mentioned, some parts of the north doesn't look as clear cut as we would like it to be. I think moving on in view of time, I just wanted to ask Chris. I know it's been quite depressing, but what about in terms of so these are the challenges that we're faced with, and we've shared a little bit about some of the activities that governments have done in order to reduce some of these challenges, not all of them, but some of these. And I think we've brought a number of ideas in terms of multiple ways that they can do it. But we also are cognizant and very much aware that there are already children that have already started smoking, despite the fact that they shouldn't be, maybe even vaping, the fact that they shouldn't be, and they're struggling to now quit. Do we have any evidence to assist colleagues out there that might be faced with these young people who are actually smoking and they want to assist them to quit at the moment, Chris?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think there isn't great evidence for what works to help adolescents quit smoking, unfortunately. Now, that's not to say that some programs and activities don't work, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep trying. But the evidence from randomized controlled trials and systematic reviews and meta-analyses, etc., of the research in adolescents for quitting smoking, particularly with pharmaceutical and behavioral tools, is very, very sparse and not strong. And vaping cessation, colleagues and I have just done a major scoping review of all the material we could find from around the world in the research. And I was just looking at it this morning, and again, there will be work coming out that suggests something might be effective, but at the moment, the only good evidence of something that works for young people to quit vaping is text messaging.
Right.
The Truth Initiative in the US ran a program, a big trial, and that looks very promising. But in terms of, and there are some early pilot studies coming out with cytisinicline or cytosine and potentially varenicline that are pointing in the direction of these products being helpful pharmaceutical aids. But NRT is not really much evidence for nicotine replacement therapy at this point in time. So in terms of the advice I'm giving to our Ministry of Health, it's going to be around it's more behavioral type of support, group-based support, individual psychological support, messaging programs, that kind of thing. So, you know, we're caught in this period of time where this wasn't a problem 5 years ago. It's now become a problem, and the research is very slow to catch up with informing, you know, the appropriate therapeutic or prevention approaches. Can I just say one thing though? We may feel despondent, but actually, you know, you mentioned, Anne, that smoking rates have dropped quite dramatically. They've halved in Malaysia in recent years in young people, and the same in New Zealand. I mean, we've actually achieved a lot. And so whilst we can be depressed about other nicotine products that are being used, I think we should celebrate the progress that's been made on the most harmful form of nicotine delivery, which is combustible tobacco, which we know is, you know, fatal for 50% of the people who use it long term. So if you're thinking about lives saved, I think we should celebrate that we're probably saving thousands and thousands of lives through all these measures that have been taken that are working. It's just that we've got other allied issues that we haven't solved yet, but we obviously know what we need to focus on. So on the one hand, yes, it is a bit depressing. On the other hand, I think there is some light potentially at the end of the tunnel. And one strategy that we haven't talked about that's been very important is pricing of tobacco products. Mm-hmm. And the more expensive tobacco, the less young people can buy it. And if it's not available in single cigarettes, but only available in packs of 20, it becomes completely unaffordable for the vast majority of young people. And that's certainly been part of New Zealand's success story with its decline in smoking, as in many other countries. It's young people smoking decline has led the way for an overall decline in smoking across the population, and it's been driven by the putting up the price of tobacco year on year on year, and pricing it out of the pockets of young people. And so they don't start smoking, and they want to quit smoking because it's so expensive if they have started. So I would say that, you know, tobacco industry fights hammer, tooth and nail, or whatever the saying is, to try and stop governments putting up the tax on tobacco, because it's the single most effective strategy that stops people smoking in the first place.
Well, thank you there, Chris. It looks like you're really putting the last words there for all of us. What I'll do is I'll get Anne to give her last words before we end. I think it's nice in terms of timing as well for all of us here. Anne, any last mentions, words of wisdom maybe to share with our audience?
Well, I think I echo what Prof. Chris has said, that although we're still facing the problem, but actually we also have achieved a lot. So we shouldn't just because of some of the setbacks, then we consider we are failing of this task. Well, what my conclude is we still have to continue our work actively pursuing a multifaceted approach to help children not to start smoking. If they have started, we will help them to quit. So those national campaigns, school-based programs, cessation services, community engagements, legislative measures, innovative technologies or smoking cessation apps, I think should go on. So the country should continue to reduce the smoking rates among the youth and provide effective support for those that seeking for help.
Lovely, Anne. I think you know, both of you have really brought my spirits up in the last 10 to 15 minutes. Actually, when I was feeling a bit down, I'm feeling a bit more optimistic again. And I think this really, you know, really allows us to conclude today's event. But let me just summarize what we've actually mentioned. So we've really done a bit of a dive deep, looking at both countries and a little bit of the prevalence in some of the other countries in our regions as well. We've talked a little bit about the challenges that all of us are facing. And what's interesting is that most of the challenges are pretty much similar, irrespective of where we are. some countries are doing a lot more than others, but some countries that are not doing so well. But both of us are still having challenges in terms of this fight against tobacco. But nevertheless, as both of our speakers and panel have mentioned, that despite these setbacks, we've seen a decline in smoking in all of, at least both of our countries. And I'm pretty sure that a number of other countries are showing the same decline as well. And the efforts that all of you are doing needs to continue on. We will eventually get to a world without tobacco. And we will at some point not need to celebrate this day because there's no more tobacco for us to actually discuss at some point in the future, we hope. So I think with that, I'm going to conclude over here and thank all of you for joining us and being with us. I'm going to pass us back to Edward for Bedfont for the final last words. Edward.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you, Dr. Amer, and thank you all for your contributions. And this panel has been absolutely excellent from my side. Very interesting. I've learned one hell of a lot, and I think as you guys have discussed, I mean, there's always going to be some challenges, new challenges being faced, but it's most important is that we're not moving one bad habit to the next. We're smoking from moving from tobacco to the vapes and as such, but the main thing of this, and I think as you guys have highlighted, that smoking rates have reduced no matter what's going on, and we learn new things that are happening all over the world, and that's why it's really important for you guys to come together and share your experiences and these things with the world. And no, thank you from Bedfont. Pleasure to have you all.